In this 7th video exploring characters within Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, I want to move on to Colonel Brandon. Is he just an old pervert? Is he just a fundamentally decent, good-hearted man, or perhaps someone scarred by the past? There'll be a number of activities for you to complete, and you'll get all of my detailed insights and quotations to use in your exam. So let's help you get full marks within your A-level examination writing your comparative essay on Sense and Sensibility. Stay tuned and watch Schofield on Shakespeare.
I'm afraid that you do need to do something when watching a YouTube revision guides. So here's the first task to get you thinking in more detail about Colonel Brandon. Consider his role in the novel and write down 5 moments in what he says, does or thinks is important and or interesting. There's no need to use quotations, just summarise each moment within a single sentence using your own words. So press pause now. The video will resume in 5 seconds time. And here's my list. First up, cruel party pooper Brandon cancels the planned excursion to Whitwell. In my second moment, Elinor gets a privileged insight into Brandon's tragic past of disappointed love and destitute females. Third, an act of spontaneous generosity. Edward is in a pickle and Brandon in a position to help out. In my fourth moment, rather than sit around and panic, heart a-racing, Brandon agrees to do something helpful and practical. Fetch Mrs Dashwood and bring her to her stricken child. And fifth, Brandon is allowed in to see Marianne following her illness. And my, how she has changed. So let's explore my 5 moments in more detail. My first extract is taken from Volume 1, Chapter 13, and comes from Barton Park. A whole party is assembled and excited about an excursion to Colonel Brandon's brother-in-law's manor house and gardens, in which the plan includes some time sailing on a lake within the grounds. But the abrupt way Brandon has left the breakfast table is ominous. Press pause to read this extract now. Of course, the main focus of this video is on Colonel Brandon himself, but I can't help drawing attention to Lady Middleton's alarm and use of the adjective extraordinary to describe something so mundane and domestic as a departure from a breakfast table, albeit an abrupt one. Lady Middleton's words highlight her own insipid dependence on the rules of propriety. Insipid because, unlike with Elinor, her character is fueled by nothing else. But returning to Brandon, it is notable how he retains his composure and remains impeccably polite, even faced with Mrs Jennings's shameless speculative cross-questioning. His responses to her are brief and well-mannered, even when she has had the indelicacy to allude to a secret figure in his life, Eliza. This is clearly a topic he doesn't want to discuss in public. Hence his blushing, probably due to a combination of embarrassment and annoyance. When Mrs Jennings characteristically sails past all boundaries of propriety and good manners by persevering with her unwelcome insinuations about the subject of the letter, Brandon instead directs his comments at Lady Middleton, the hostess at Barton Park, and the opposite to her mother in terms of her adherence to propriety. He remains courteous and apologises for the fact that he has to leave for London immediately. At no point does he react to Mrs Jennings's shameless digging for gossip in a way that, for instance, Mrs Dashwood or Marianne might have done. and his control and civility here make him stand out as a genuine gentleman of impeccable breeding. As usual, Mrs. Jennings is partly right and partly wrong in her speculations. Colonel Brandon is indeed travelling to London on business relating to Eliza, but she is not his natural daughter. Nonetheless, Brandon's good manners mean that he would never challenge or upbraid a member of his social circle, let alone a lady. He can't prevent himself from flinching, but he can ensure that he doesn't react beyond this. Such careful, controlled behaviour does mean that, in comparison to Willoughby, Brandon can be viewed by others as somewhat dull. Arguably, Elinor suffers from the same comparison with Marianne. My second moment comes from much later in the novel, chapter 9 from volume 2. However, it relates to my first, as Colonel Brandon belatedly explains to Elinor the real reasons why he had to dash off to London rather than lead the fun expedition to Whitwell. Read through this extract now and press pause. So Brandon rushed off to London to support Eliza, his ward, who had been impregnated, then abandoned by Willoughby. We as readers would retrospectively have forgiven him if he had subjected Willoughby to at least one barbed comment at the time. But no, Brandon's rhetorical questions here show that he recognises the pointlessness of after the event hectoring or upbraiding. He knows that angry digs would have gone against the rules of propriety, and that telling Willoughby the full truth about his motives for dashing to London would have achieved precisely nothing. And so he decided to keep the painful truth to himself. Brandon's strong sense of morality come across in his passionate lines here. He uses a superlative utmost to confirm that Eliza could not be in a more miserable state, whilst the tricolon, no creditable home, no help, no friends, and the anaphoric, he had left, reflect his rising indignation and outraged incredulity at the way Willoughby abandoned his ward. Yet Brandon, toying with his conscience, toying with the fact that he is not a disinterested party in the burgeoning relationship between Marianne and Willoughby, desperate to do the right thing morally, has kept these feelings to himself for months. The parallels with Elinor are clear. She also kept a deeply personal secret to herself, Lucy's engagement to Edward, in a way which showed extraordinary selflessness and stoicism. But one of the messages of the novel is that unexpressed emotion can be as potent and legitimate as emotion clearly visible on the surface. Just because Colonel Brandon and Elinor choose not to reveal their feelings openly for significant chunks of the novel doesn't mean that they don't have them. When Marianne finds out the truth about Elinor's nobility and selflessness, she cries, "How barbarous have I been to you?" But couldn't this exclamation also apply to her treatment of Colonel Brandon, to her assumptions about his own inability to feel, to experience due to his age, about his own inability to suffer? In the third moment, we see Colonel Brandon reflecting on the way Edward Ferrars has been disinherited, following the unearthing of his secret engagement to Lucy Steele. Read through this extract now and press pause. I think we see a different side to Colonel Brandon here. In my two previous moments, he has shown himself to be a deep thinker, considerate, controlled. But here we see a view on love that even his harsh critic Marianne might agree with. She expresses her view on marriage in chapter 8 of volume 1 when she lambasts those who marry for social and financial security rather than true love and passion. Isn't Brandon expressing a similar regard for heartfelt passion when he talks here of the cruelty, the impolitic cruelty of trying to separate two people who genuinely love each other? The use of the adjective impolitic is significant, as it shows Brandon is not just thinking morally, but practically as well. Longer term consequences and fractures can ensue by forcing apart those truly in love, as confirmed by his subsequent sentence when he implies an understanding that deep, thwarted passion has the potential to drive humans to extreme, potentially harmful actions. Now, there are numerous ironies at play here, which affect how we as readers respond to Brandon's speech in this chapter. Firstly, the reader has a pretty good inkling by now that Lucy and Edward may have outgrown their previous attachment to each other. Certainly, we are better informed than Colonel Brandon, who takes the situation at face value and assumes deep love. Secondly, we know, whereas Brandon doesn't, that Elinor continues to love Edward, and so we'll be finding this confidence a genuine trial and a source of complex, mixed emotions. A consequence of this discussion is that Elinor will feel compelled to pass on information to the man she loves, which will enable him to marry another woman. Thus, naturally, our attention as readers is on how Elinor reacts rather than Colonel Brandon. Nonetheless, there is no sense that Brandon should be aware of these undercurrents, and a close reading of the passage does give us more insight into Brandon's character. Whereas Marianne might in the past have been keen to dismiss him as a slow, dull dodderer, here he has come to a very quick decision based on just a few meetings with Edward, guided by his own instinct and experience when it comes to making judgments about people. Less careful readers might even claim that Brandon is acting somewhat impulsively and irrationally by giving away the Delaford living to someone he barely knows. But no, he trusts and relies on his equal ally Elinor's judgment, as well as his own, and recognises and empathises with the perilous situation Edward is in. And so he acts swiftly and decisively. And these perhaps are adverbs which wouldn't immediately spring to mind when thinking of this older, decent-hearted gentleman. Further evidence of Colonel Brandon being able to act swiftly and decisively come within my fourth moment. Marianne is ill, could die, but her mother is far away in Devonshire. Cue Colonel Brandon to the rescue. Read through this extract now, pressing pause. As I've mentioned in my previous character videos, it's important to stress a context in which women, especially women without a fortune, were severely hampered in terms of their ability to travel. As Catherine Limmer stresses within her essay for the English and Media Centre, Women and Mobility, in Sense and Sensibility, as a man, Colonel Brandon is not hindered by cost or social restrictions from being able to travel independently and decisively. By contrast, the women, including Elinor, have to wait, immobile, in one location. Seen within this context, Brandon's offer to fetch Mrs Dashwood is even kinder, even more critical. Hence Elinor's broken syntax, which reflects her stuttering gratitude during this tumultuous period. It is clear that Brandon is a man to be relied upon in an emergency, in a difficult situation. We have another example of the superlative utmost, this time used to indicate his swiftness with which he gets everything ready for the journey. Note also the fact that he is considerate and composed enough to think ahead in order to give Elinor an impressively accurate idea of the time he is likely to return. He himself is suffering terribly at the thought of Marianne's illness and the idea that she might die. Something confirmed explicitly by the narrator when he returns from his trip to fetch Mrs Dashwood. Yet he is able to put aside his own feelings utterly to one side, to focus on selfless, helpful actions. No time is wasted with superfluities, or wittering, or I shall be praying for you. He just gets on with it, as a dark, strong, silent hero should do. And finally, my fifth moment. Marianne is out of danger. She has condescended to let Colonel Brandon come and see her. Read through this extract now, hitting that pause button. So seeing Marianne is bringing back painful memories of the past for Colonel Brandon, at least according to Elinor's eagle eye. Memories of Eliza, the girl he has loved since childhood, with similarities to the way Elizabeth and Victor Frankenstein grew close in Mary Shelley's famous novel. However, unlike with Victor Frankenstein, Eliza was married to Brandon's elder brother for financial reasons, a marriage which ended in disaster, divorce, and the woman living in abject poverty. Eventually, Brandon tracks down his former love to a sponging house, a grim holding place for debtors, where he is shocked to see her deterioration, so altered, so faded, worn down by acute suffering of every kind. Hardly could I believe the melancholy and sickly figure before me to be the remains of the lovely, blooming, healthful girl on whom I had once doted. So when Brandon sees Marianne's illness-ravaged eyes, her unhealthy pallor, the way she is sitting back, and picks up on her consciousness of being in some way beholden to him, it is upsetting. He cannot help but feel, and for his sensibilities to be gleaned by others. Although, of course, it is only Elinor who at this point knows the full story about Eliza. I've sometimes wondered whether we as modern readers might suspect Brandon of seeing Marianne as a substitute Eliza, which, if the case, seems rather unfair on the younger woman, who might wish to be taken as an individual in her own right. But the more I think about Brandon as I make this video, the more I change my mind. Yes, Brandon's emotions and actions have been shaped by his past experiences. But this scene simply confirms Brandon's humanity without detracting from his genuine long-standing love for Marianne. He gets the vulnerability of women within the patriarchal world they inhabit. He implicitly gets the fact that it is women who are likely to suffer most following the failure of love. And he implicitly understands that this can have unfair, unequal consequences. And here with Marianne, his heart yearns selflessly for what she has suffered following the failure of her relationship with Willoughby. And actually, ironically, as an older man, Brandon is in a better position to empathise with Marianne than she would ever have initially given him credit for he himself has experienced something similarly shattering when the object of his love married his brother. One question we as readers have to answer is whether we despair or cheer at Brandon's subsequent marriage to Marianne. I tend to oscillate between the two positions, but Emily Auerbach feels the marriage should be a cause for celebration. What she says is well worth pondering. Let's move on. In the exam, you will need to be able to wheel out actual quotations giving very specific individual insight. So it's time for a second task. Reread sections of the novel before writing out 5 quotations which give different insight into what Brandes is really like. In order to ensure that you're revising as many different sections of the novel as possible, avoid quotations or sections of the text which have been used so far in this video. Press pause now and get started. Well, here's my first quotation, taken from chapter 10 of volume 1. when the Dashwoods are still getting to know Colonel Brandon. His manners, though serious, were mild, and his reserve appeared rather the result of some oppression of spirits than any natural gloominess of temper. This is an early signal to the reader that Brandon may not be withdrawn by nature, but due to the cumulative effect of experience. His past disappointments in love, including being present in the final moments prior to the death of the one he loved so passionately, have changed him and made him far more serious and reflective. At this stage of the novel, we don't know this, but Elinor is perceptive enough, although Marianne isn't, to sense that some kind of significant past event may have left a permanent emotional scar. Something confirmed by Sir John's hints of past injuries and disappointments. My second is an interesting quotation. The context is that Elinor and Brandon are talking about the fact that Marianne doesn't approve of second attachments. Something rather ironic, at least according to Elinor, given that their own father married twice. Brandon declares diplomatically, "There is something so amiable in the prejudices of a young mind that one is sorry to see them give way to the reception of more general opinions." What we are seeing here from Brandon is a rare generosity of spirit. Marianne's opinion that one should only love once is not only dogmatic but utterly unrealistic, and it also implicitly rules him out as a potential partner. Yet, rather than criticise or judge, he uses the adjective amiable to actually praise fresh, youthful viewpoints. This is someone who is flexible and open-hearted enough to accept people as they are, even when their perspectives are unfair or unreasonable. These are the words of a man who has experienced life and is comfortable enough in his own skin to accept difference. Similar diplomacy is seen in my third quotation, which follows Margaret's revelation at Barton Park that a man with a name beginning with F was Elinor's particular favourite. Lady Middleton's dislike of raillery led her to change the subject and make a reference to the weather. The idea, however, started by her, was immediately pursued by Colonel Brandon, who was on every occasion mindful of the feelings of others, and much was said on the subject of rain by both of them. So both Lady Middleton and Colonel Brandon are acting to spare Elinor's blushes from Mrs Jennings and Sir John's grasping, gossipy curiosity. However, whereas Lady Middleton is motivated primarily by a preference for decorum, Brandon is motivated by his mindfulness of the feelings of others. Here we have a man who is sensitively attuned to other people's emotions, particularly women perhaps, and can be relied upon to act with tact and delicacy. The wonder is why he is apparently such good friends with Sir John. Shall we move to London for my fourth quotation? Rumours are rife that Marianne is engaged to Willoughby, and that an announcement may be imminent. Brandon has arrived at Mrs Jennings's residence, and seems pleased to find Elinor on her own. He asks, "Is everything finally settled? Is it impossible to? But I have no rights, and I could have no chance of succeeding." When we think of Colonel Brandon, we think of gentlemanly restraints or impeccable manners. We think of reliability. But here he is pitched up to finally get something off his chest. He speaks these lines in a voice of some agitation, and the broken off "is it impossible to" shows his raging internal conflict between his need to find out the truth about the status of Marianne's relationship with Willoughby and his own realisation that such questioning breaks the rules of propriety. Yet, as is sometimes the case with propriety, it can occasionally be refreshing when conventions are broken. Just as Willoughby's late evening visit to Cleveland, in which he insists his side of the story is heard by Elinor, is strangely mesmerising. Here, Brandon's faltering questioning show that actually he's a man of feeling, that he does have passion, and that these feelings can occasionally break through superficial gloominess of temper. finally back to Brandon's revelations about Eliza, young Eliza, and Willoughby. I wonder whether this encounter is sometimes overlooked. We met by appointment, he to defend, I to punish his conduct. We returned unwounded, and the meeting therefore never got abroad. In other words, Brandon challenged Willoughby to a duel. As it happens, neither was hurt, but the duel took place nonetheless. Elinor sighed over the fancied necessity of this, but perhaps we as readers are secretly rather impressed. Brandon may be significantly older than both Willoughby and Marianne, but he is unquestionably a man. His past as a soldier is not dwelt upon, but if it were, perhaps Marianne would be less inclined to write him off as an irrelevant old has-been. He may be utterly restrained and polite in society, but when action is required, even violent physical action, he remains the man. Writing in Silence and the Duel in Sense and Sensibility, Bruton suggests that the duel and Marianne's illness show up the risks of a society in which the gentry have too much time on their hands and are able, thanks to patriarchal systems, to act as predatory males on unprotected females. Willoughby certainly is idle and predatory. But Brandon himself? How do we, as modern readers, respond to his notion that he must punish Willoughby's conduct? Is this as much about male posturing as a desire to act on behalf of helpless, wronged women? Is it as much about repressed, jealous sexual desire as a sense of moral indignation?
It looks like we've come to the end of this video exploring character within Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. I hope it's been useful. Many thanks for watching.